Syria and the Middle East has been turned upside down in just 2 weeks. And this is the man responsible for the fall of Assad. He is Ahmad al-Sharaa, better known as Abu Mohammad al-Jolani, the leader of the rebel militia Hayat Tahrir Al-Sham, or HTS. Jolani is considered a terrorist by many countries, and the United States has a $10 million bounty on his head. The country now has a transitional government, and Jolani is its military leader, but some already see him as the de facto head of the new Syria. We're going to tell you about his journey to becoming the face of a revolution, and what Jolani's leadership could mean for the future of Syria and the wider world. This is Syria's rebel leader explained. Another week and another explainer on Syria. Last time we looked at how Assad's allies had deserted him and left him vulnerable to losing power. Here we're going to talk about the man who defeated him. Ahmad Hussein al-Sharaa was born in Saudi Arabia in 1982. His family had moved there from Syria. They lived in the Golan Heights but had to flee after it was occupied by Israel following the Six-Day War. And the name Jolani was chosen by him as a reference to his family's origins in the Golan Heights. When he was 7, he returned to Syria, settling in the capital, Damascus. As a young man in 2000, he watched the start of the Second Intifada, a major uprising by Palestinians against Israel, and Jolani says this began his pathway to jihadism. A year later, al-Qaeda carried out the 9/11 attacks against the United States.
يكذب عليك أي شخص يعيش في العالم الإسلامي والوطن العربي إذا قال لك أنه لم يكن سعيد في ذاك الوقت.
With America invading Afghanistan and then preparing for war against Iraq, Jolani travelled to Baghdad, and he was there when the conflict began. He joined the fight against the US occupation, and in 2005 he was imprisoned in a US-run jail in Iraq. It was in that prison that he met Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the man who would become the leader of the jihadist group, the Islamic State, or IS. Jolani says he used his time in prison to write a thesis about how to fight jihad in Syria.
Syrian society has been brutalized for the best part of 5 decades. So Jolani, like many Syrians, is a product of that brutalizing, barbaric environment, and that really helped fuel his trajectory into the global jihad movement.
In 2011, Jolani was out of prison, and the Arab Spring had begun across the Middle East, mass civilian protests against authoritarian regimes. And Syrians were out in the streets as well, demonstrating against President Bashar al-Assad. They were met with brutal force, and rebel groups took up arms against Assad's forces. Jolani was sent back to Syria by his former prison mate Baghdadi, back with funds to create a new jihadist group to fight against the regime. Jolani established the al-Nusra Front, which quickly became a prominent fighting force.
فنحن في غضون سنة واحدة من هؤلاء 6 أصبحنا 5000.
But while Jolani used the financial backing of Baghdadi, he distanced himself from the leader after the creation of the Islamic State. Jolani's al-Nusra Front instead joined al-Qaeda, becoming their key fighting force in Syria.
He's quite a slippery character who's always been titrating different relationships up and down based on what they're going to serve and deliver for him.
It wasn't long before Jolani announced a split from al-Qaeda too, and in 2016 he formed the group that would become Hayat Tahrir Al-Sham, or HTS.
علما أن هذا التشكيل الجديد ليس له علاقة بأي جهة خارجية.
It's clear that Jolani relied on both ISIS and al-Qaeda to establish his military foothold in Syria. And Amnesty International accused al-Nusra, along with 4 other rebel groups, of committing war crimes and other violations of international humanitarian law with impunity. But Jolani has tried to distance himself from some of the most extreme elements of jihadism. The man who cites 9/11 as having a key moment in his journey to becoming a fighter also says that he always opposed the killing of innocent civilians in his fight against the Americans in Iraq, as well as against the Assad regime in Syria. One of his key messages to Syria, as well as the wider world, is that while ISIS and al-Qaeda fight a religious war, his war has always been against President Bashar al-Assad. With that firm focus on Syria, HTS under Jolani became the dominant force in the northwestern Syrian province of Idlib, home to 4 million people in 2019, a rebel stronghold in the face of the Assad regime. They created a civilian front, the Syrian Salvation Government, appointing ministers and providing public services. Jolani was very visible at this time, engaging with the public, and he reached out to non-Muslim communities as well, something very different to both ISIS and al-Qaeda.
He has, over the last 2 or 3 years, for example, been showing himself at churches, been showing the erection of Christmas trees in areas that he controls. He's been very keen to project this image as a competent statesman for some time now.
While HTS has taken a seemingly conciliatory approach to governing non-Muslim communities, at the same time it has also ruthlessly suppressed other opposition groups. And it's been reported that HTS has tortured and killed civilians in their detention centres. That brings the story up to this year, where the battle lines in Syria were essentially frozen, until this happened. With conflicts in Gaza and Lebanon, and with Russia fighting Ukraine, the world's attention was not on Syria when HTS launched a surprise offensive late in November. Within days, Aleppo had fallen, a huge moment. HTS had taken Syria's second largest city. Assad, with the support of Russian fighter jets, responded with airstrikes. But the strength of support from Assad's allies, Iran, Russia and Hezbollah in particular, was limited. And on the ground in Syria, Assad's own forces crumbled in the face of the HTS assault. Jolani's forces took Hama, a city that had previously never fallen into rebel control following the 2011 uprising.
The progress and execution of plans have been swift, with clear communication and adherence to commands. The revolution has transitioned from chaos and randomness to a state of order.
HTS then swept Homs and reached the capital Damascus. Meanwhile, Assad fled to Russia with his whole family. As he entered the capital, Jolani dropped his name associated with his jihadist past. He is Ahmad al-Sharaa once again and is promising a new start for Syria. In less than a fortnight, the entire complexion of Syria has completely changed, and so too has the Middle East. Without Assad in charge, Iran and Hezbollah have been dramatically weakened, and Russia, which relied on the former regime for a foothold in the region, is facing the prospect of negotiating with the same rebel forces it's been fighting against for more than a decade.
The Russian column has just set off again. They were stuck for nearly 2 hours at the side of the road with a flat tyre. They don't look like a defeated army. They're retreating in good order. They must have come to some kind of agreement with the new authorities in Damascus.
What al-Jolani and Hayat Tahrir Al-Sham have achieved in Syria is simply breathtaking. Jolani launched essentially a blitzkrieg attack against government positions, sweeping across very large parts of the country with blistering speed.
With HTS now manoeuvring to lead the whole of Syria, what kind of government can the country expect?
We can think of the model that Hayat Tahrir Al-Sham might seek for Syria as being Taliban light, by which I mean they want an Islamic character to Syrian society. He needs to work out exactly what kind of Islamic hue and tint he wants to put onto Syrian civil society.
One of Jolani's first challenges will be persuading the West to recognise HTS as a legitimate power. The group is currently listed as a terrorist organisation by many countries, but that could change quickly.
I think there is a sense of rethinking amongst Western nations now about what to do with Abu Mohammad al-Jolani. The US State Department has said it will work with anybody in Syria provided they are willing to transition the country in a way that respects minorities, respects all the diverse and different parts of the rich tapestry of Syrian society. And I think the UK government, like a number of other European governments as well, will look to engage with him because you can't ignore him at this stage.
Part of Jolani's game plan is to present himself as a pragmatic and moderate leader, while reassuring minority groups they will be safe. A strategy to appeal to the whole of Syria, but also the wider world, and one he's been pursuing long term. You see, Jolani claims he's been trying to distance himself from more extreme elements for more than a decade, and he gave his first interview to Western media in 2021. And this is what an HTS representative told Channel 4 News.
This organization represents a third way, meaning it is not al-Qaeda, it is not ISIS, but rather a third path, a national revolutionary path. The revolution has now triumphed, and we do not wish to enter a new phase of revenge.
But can he really be trusted now that he's in the most powerful position of his life.
He senses an opportunity to write his name in the history books, and therefore he is trying to titrate different relationships up and down as he needs to in order to deliver a result for him. And of course, delivering a result for him will really mean delivering a result for Syria and transitioning Syrian civil society into a post-Assad structure where minorities are accommodated, where minorities are comfortable, they're not persecuted.
The fall of the brutal Assad regime has been widely celebrated by Syrians.
We are overwhelmed with happiness.
My feeling is I can't speak, man.
And so far, Jolani is treading carefully with his people, taking the same pragmatic and conciliatory approach that served HTS well in Idlib.
So we're at the very start of a journey, and of course its trajectory could go in many ways, but I think there are grounds to be very cautiously optimistic about what might happen next.
Jolani's next moves will be pivotal, not just for his own career, but for the future of a country long torn apart by conflict. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to catch up with our other coverage from Syria, including Poraka Bryan's incredible access to the notorious Zednaya prison, used by the Assad regime against his enemies. And do subscribe for more videos like this, where we try to make sense of this crucial moment for both the Middle East and the world.